Sadr's supporters celebrate in the streets. The Shia cleric's party wins the most seats in parliament, but can Muqtada al Sadr form an effective coalition? I'm Maria Ramos, and today's newsmaker is the Iraqi election. More than 3,000 candidates, 329 seats and 25 million registered voters, but no outright winner. Over the next few weeks, possibly even months, Iraq's politicians will be wheeling and dealing as they try to form a government. It won't be easy, but Iraqi nationalist Muqtada al Sadr is in pole position. Initial results show his party has increased its number of seats in parliament, and the Shia cleric is celebrating.
It is the day of the good Sadrist, the day of the displaced Badri, the day of the revolutionary Hakim, the day of the peaceful Tishrini, the day of the just secularist, the day of the patriotic civilian, and the day of the honorable children of the religious references.
Sadr's influence in Iraq has been steadily growing. Now, he was born in 1974 in the city of Najaf, considered holy to Shias. His father was the revered Grand Ayatollah Mohammed Sadiq al-Sadr, who was reportedly killed by Saddam Hussein in 1999. In 2003, al-Sadr rose to prominence after forming the Mahdi army to take on US and Iraqi forces. The militia group was ultimately defeated. In 2007, Sadr went into self-imposed exile in Iran, but returned to Iraq in 2011. And in 2018, the Sadr-led Sairun alliance picked up 54 seats in parliamentary elections, more than any other group. Now, this time, earlier results suggest his bloc has picked up around 75 seats. While that's a relatively good outcome for Muqtada al Sadr, the same cannot be said for those closely linked to Iran. The Fatah alliance, once the second largest bloc in parliament, was the biggest loser, although they're claiming that this year's result has been fabricated. Hadi al-Amiri, who leads the group, has vowed to appeal it. But the European Union, which oversaw the poll, said it was technically well managed.
EU observers have assessed that voting on election days was largely peaceful, calm and orderly. And I commend Iraq and its people for this conduct. Voters were able to freely express their will. Party agent and domestic citizens observers were present in the vast majority of polling stations, and voting procedures were largely followed. The overall conduct of the voting was rated positively in 95% of the polling stations visited by our observers.
So the EU says the vote was largely fair, but millions still didn't turn up to the polls. Just 41% of the electorate made their way to the ballot box as Iraq saw its lowest ever election turnout. Anti-government protests in 2019 had forced Baghdad to bring the vote forward, but many in the country still seem disillusioned with the system and those who run it.
I will not vote because the results will not be credible. I don't think this election will be free and honest. And I don't think that an honourable Iraqi can be a candidate among those groups, because they are all failures and do not love their country or are loyal to it. Instead, they want to give it away.
Some tell you the result is set. Others tell you there is fraud. Others tell you your votes will be thrown away. There is no candidate worth electing, especially the old ones. They were nominated before and they have been here for 20 years with no competitors. We have not benefited from anything.
We have lived through the protests. We wanted change. We wanted our rights. You have all seen the oppression and the killing. What can we ask of a government like this?
Ahmed, the protesters and the Tishreen uprising were trying to change the situation, like the Electoral Commission and the electoral law. But nothing has changed despite a slight tangible change in the electoral law. But as long as the Electoral Commission has not changed and the entire authority is in the hands of the militias and the political parties, how would anyone participate?
Now let's talk more about this year's election and whether Muqtada al Sadr has the backing that he needs to form a coalition. Joining me now from Baghdad is Ahmed Rushdi, president of the House of Iraqi Expertise Foundation and also former advisor to the Speaker of Iraq's parliament. Also in the Iraqi capital is Lahib Higel, a senior Iraq analyst with the International Crisis Group. And Altikriti joins us from London. He's an Iraq analyst and the chief executive of the Cordoba Foundation. Welcome to all my guests. I want to start with you, Ahmed Rushdi. You know, one of the biggest stories coming out of these elections so far is, of course, the low turnout. Why is that?
Well, we all know that the low turnout has legitimate reasons, which because the people of Iraq since 2003 until now didn't manage to see successful attempts from the political process, which is built from that time until now, and they didn't see actually any successful attempts from the political system to have something on the ground. This is the first issue that push for the low turnout. The second one is the corruption. And we all know that corruption actually is a chronic case in Iraq. And it started from 2003 until now. And we're all hearing a huge amount of money actually in the hands of the politicians that already being outside Iraq. And we are hearing billions of dollars that already in the pockets of the politicians. And we're losing so many things, especially on the infrastructure. And there is no any attempt to rebuild Iraq in the way that we can see something else.
Now, Lahib, that same question to you. Why was voter turnout so low, do you think?
Well, a large part of the Iraqi population is very disillusioned with the political system, especially the young part, which makes up the largest part of the demographic in Iraq. And they were the ones who did not turn out to vote.
So that disillusionment, that's incredible to hear, because as you say, that demographic is so big. 60% are under 25. But let's look at those preliminary results. And of course, the results are still being counted. Muqtada al Sadr's bloc has won the most seats. How much support does he really have? And that question I put to you, Anas, in London.
Muqtada al Sadr has won and won outright. I mean, he won without any even close competition. And there are a number of reasons for this. Undoubtedly, the fact that Sadr holds a particular veneered position within his constituency, which is nigh on 2 to probably 3 million people who basically move upon his instruction, they sit upon his instruction, they act upon his instruction, and will vote upon his instruction. And whilst that's, within a democracy, that's something that you have to accept. But I have to say that it doesn't bode well for the kind of Iraq that the vast majority of Iraqis wish for. The kind of Iraq that is creative, that is inventive, that is original, that is sovereign, that is independent. That kind of Iraq, in all seriousness, regardless of the mechanism of democracy, is incompatible with that kind of constituency, that large segment of society who simply await whether to move or not upon the instruction of a religious leader. But having said that, I think that the most prominent feature of these elections was the fact that the vast majority of Iraqis chose not to partake. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is the real story. That is what we need to look at, we need to ask about. And I agree with both Ahmed Rushdi as well as with Lahib that it's the absolute despondency of the majority of Iraqi people with the political system. And the question is that how will this then allow for not only a legitimacy might not come into this, but an executive, a government that can actually act in the best interest of Iraqis, especially in the face of the kind of challenges, whether they be security, whether they be strategic or economic, that the entire country faces. That, I believe, is going to be the most prominent question.
And Lahib, back to what you said about that voter despondency, disillusion. When they see Muqtada al Sadr now gaining the most votes, what does the street say, especially, you know, that the youth, the people that were out protesting, the ones that pushed for these elections to come forward?
Well, I have asked every taxi driver that I've met, every waiter, every shopkeeper in the last few days if they have voted or not. All of them have said no. So already before the results were announced, people were convinced that these elections were not going to bring about any change. And just one addition to what Anas said, Sadr he won the largest amount of votes for sure, but he didn't increase necessarily the amount of votes in comparison to previous elections. So it's not a question about increased popularity of Sadr. It's the question of the fact that he was the one who made up the best campaign strategy, had the best idea of how to field candidates in smaller electoral districts. And this is what the other coalitions lost out on, because they had candidates within their own coalitions competing with each other in these smaller districts.
Ahmed Rushdi, so obviously now we need coalitions to be formed. What sort of coalition is going to emerge in Iraq? Who will be the kingmaker?
Well, let us separate two main things. Number one, the process itself. It's supposed to be now, the final results will be declared by IHAC because it's only 90% now declared. We need the 10% also. Then after that, there will be a period of 1 month for the appeals. Then after that, there will be certification by IHAC and by the Supreme Court for the results. Then we will go for the first session of the parliament, which will be opened to choose the speaker and the president. Then the president will ask the biggest bloc inside the parliament to form a government in 1 month. So we are talking about, let's say, mid-February or maybe until March. Because what we are now seeing in 24 hours, there is a real shock happened to the political parties, especially in the Shia areas, or the Shia environment, is that how we lost so many votes, so many seats in front of Sairun. Because Fatah has about 48 seats, now they are only 17. So you can imagine how much they are shocked. The second thing is that, okay, now we know the winners. The first thing that Mr. Maliki did yesterday at late night is making a coalition which has reached about 73 MPs, which is equal to what the Sadrists now have. So who is the biggest bloc now? It's a huge question. Now, let us also refer to something very important. We are now still waiting for the 10%. So maybe the Sadrists will reach about 78. Now, if we're going to see the picture, the political picture now on that way, it's now the ball in the yard of Halbusi and the KDB. Both of them has the biggest seats in their ethnic regions. So Halbusi has about 43 seats and KDB has about 32 seats. So I'm sure is that Muqtada al Sadr will always go for majority government. So which means that he wants to form a government with Halbusi, with the KDB, and put all the others in the opposition inside the parliament. Now, the same for Maliki. Maliki said yesterday is that, okay, guys, I now have the same number of seats, and I will form the government with the help of Halbusi and KDB, or we can make a compromise with the Sadrists. That means we are going forward for a real political conflict. When it will be resolved, when they're going to reach to compromise, no one knows.
Okay. And as to you, so Ahmed has mentioned that a political conflict, months possibly of negotiating. What, from an outsider looking in, what does this mean for Iraq?
Iraq has been in a state of chaos to varying degrees for the past 18.5 years. Since the fall of the former regime, Iraq has never actually arrived at a particular phase of time when you could actually say that there's a sense of stability, there's a tendency towards rebuilding, reconstructing, towards rewarding the Iraqi people for their, I don't know, decades long of perseverance with utterly miserable conditions. There has never been that, and therefore the situation or the scenario that Ahmed Rushdi draws, I think he's actually being quite optimistic when he says that by February or March we might end up with an executive. I think that we're looking further towards May and June, and you know, in the interim, I think there's going to be, you know, God forbid, attacks, violence, especially that one of the major losing elements in the elections is Fatah, who, like Ahmed said, have receded from having 48 parliamentarians to only 17, and Fatah is representative of, you know, essentially, you know, the militias, the popular Hashd, and you know, these are people who carry the most advanced weapons in Iraq. So I foresee turbulence. I foresee even further chaos, and you know, I could only hope, and I believe that we all share this, that things won't transpire as painfully or horrifically as things are laid to do. The fact is that, and I agree absolutely with what Lahib said, the fact that Sadr has come out on top is no indication that he himself has increased his share. It's just that even more Iraqis have chosen not to even partake, not to even bother leaving their homes towards the polling stations. And for that, the Sadr movement, with a little bit of organization campaign-wise, they managed to capitalize on this particular phenomenon. But the fact of the matter is, Iraq is going to continue the state of chaos, of carnage. Iraqi citizens, the vast majority of whom, the overwhelming majority of whom, will still suffer the lack of basic services, the lack of security, the lack of electricity come the summer.
Sorry to interrupt you, but as I hear this, as I hear you saying this, I just think, you know, from an outsider looking in, what were these elections for? You know, we cover the protests, the lack of electricity, the lack of water, and it's so sad to hear that, you know, your grim outlook there. But just...
Yeah, it breaks my heart to be so grim, but the fact is, you need something to cover, you know, a facade in order to say that you have some semblance of democracy. The situation, and this is my own opinion, the political system is corrupt. It doesn't work, and you can get the best of politicians to head this political structure, and it still won't work. We need to go back to day one. That's you know, that's how I see it. I've spoken to US advisors, I've spoken to European advisors, to the British government, and I've said, listen, however hard everyone tries, ultimately speaking, the Iraqi individual will continue to pay for the horrific, tremendous, corrupt attempt to dissemble the state of Iraq and then rebuild it totally haphazardly, absolutely wrong, and upon principles that simply won't work.
I want to go back to you, Lahib, and ask you what these elections, when we do get the results finally, what will that mean, if you can say that already, for Iran's influence in Iraq?
I think already the election results shows that Iraqis, if at most obviously not interested in politics in the first place, but definitely there has been at least a no vote for the pro-Iran parties in parliament, or people have chosen to stay home and not cast their vote on anything else either. So there will be a reduced influence, but not an insignificant one. At the end of the day, the government will be formed through consensus between the main parties. I do not think that we have anything called real opposition politics in Iraq. perhaps there will be a first attempt to that. But the pro-Iran parties will have to be represented in government, and so still that influence will exist, even though it won't be at the same level of what it was before.
Ahmed Rushdi, Iran's influence in Iraq, where do you see that, and how big do you see that in the coming months, years?
Well, actually, what the numbers said is something else, is that the influence of Iran inside the parliament is getting much less. Eventually, if the Fatah and Maliki and the Hikmah has all those low numbers, so it shows you how much the influence of the Iranian will be inside the parliament. But the most important thing is that let us not rush the consequences of the results, because eventually we need to suspect what's going to happen. Because if Mr. Maliki succeeded in joining Azim, Fatah, Hikmah, and others with him to form about 73 MPs as a coalition inside the parliament, it shows you that there are other ways for the Iranian influence to have some sort of a political game inside the parliament to try to share power with the Sadrist. The most important thing is that Muqtada al Sadr willingly will give some sort of power to Maliki or to Fatah. I doubt it. Now I doubt it, because yesterday Sayyid Muqtada was obvious, was so clear to say we need to stop the militia, we need to stop the corrupts, as we all know as Iraqis, is that he's referring to Maliki, he's referring to Fatah.
Is that what you understood by his speech? Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Is that what you understood by his speech when he said even those who claim resistance or such, it's time for the people to live in peace without occupation, terrorism, militias and kidnapping? Was that in reference to Iran?
Yeah, of course, because he's referring to those players who are already backed by Iran. The most important thing is that I don't think he wants to make a compromise now. It shows that he's in a victorious spirit. He also said that, okay, I will go to the others to form a government and let the others be an opposition inside the parliament. So it shows you he is really, really going forward to have some sort of a spark of a conflict in front of his opponents in the Shia community.
All right, we have 3 minutes to go. I want to see if we can end with a positive. Was there any positives coming out of this election? Any achievements? That question to you, Lahib. Maybe the fact that independent candidates won seats, is that a positive?
Absolutely. There is one positive trend, and that is that especially one party that came out of the Tishreen movement or the protest called Muqtada won at least 9 seats. In addition to independents of around 20 for now, what the final total we'll see. But there's also a question about the independents in terms of if there are pre-alignments of those independents to already established parties. Either way, this inroad for new parties, for a number of independents is a positive trend. And it's something that could inspire parties that actually boycotted these elections to participate in the next ones.
Anas, I saw you nodding there. Do you see any positives?
I'll tell you what, I mean, like I started by saying, I think that, 18 and a half years that saw deep divisions across sectarian as well as ethnic lines in Iraq, to the extent that many a party are talking about, just dividing Iraq federally, confederally, whatever it is, just basically breaking away Sunnis from Shias, Arabs from Kurds and Turkmens and the such. But the fact is that over 70% of Iraqis managed to share not going to the elections. That is, I believe, a very, very good starting point to rebuild Iraq, to rebuild Iraqi society, because 70%, 75% of Iraqis saw that there is no use from going out and voting. That is a starting point, I guess. It's a sharing point. It's probably a grim sharing point, but it's a sharing point nonetheless.
All right. And my final word, a question to you, Ahmed. Any positives?
Well, maybe I'm not optimistic, but I think what's happening now, it shows you that even the next government will be only for 1 year. maybe 1 year and a half. It cannot reach 4 years, because if they didn't make a compromise, politically speaking, they will not reach to a real effective government. The other question is that even if they make a compromise, can they solve the problems of Iraq, or Iraq will stay on that way? I'm agreeing to what Anas said. So it shows you that eventually we are not looking for a great success after the election, especially with the boycott, with the 70% boycott. Okay. And the owners of this political system need to manage well the results and need to manage well the consequences of this political system.
All right, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you to all of you. Anas Altikriti in London, Lahib Higel in Baghdad, and also Ahmed Rushdi in Baghdad. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching. See you next time on The Newsmakers. Bye-bye.